Hello friends, welcome back. Let's explore how an application password is used and how WordPress sets the current user when using a username and application password. The REST API checks capabilities and uses the current user functions to verify whether the logged in user has the access. In this case, the user isn't logged into the site as they would in a typical session. Instead, we send authentication information with each request. To understand this process, let us go to the user.php. This file is located inside of the WP includes folder. In this file, we will find the function WP authenticate application password. So let me open the outline. We will find this function here. So this function authenticates the user using application password. Application passwords were introduced in WordPress 5.6. This function takes input such as the input user, username, and password and checks whether the request is an XML RPC request or a REST API request. Authentication only occurs if it is an API request. If not, the input user object, which is an instance of the WP user, or simply the WP error object is returned. Additionally, as we can see, the WordPress also provides a filter here, which can be used for customizations in some use cases. If the input is valid, then it authenticates the user and we return the user object. To track how this function is called, we can perform a reverse search. So let me search for this function execution inside of this file. We can see the WP validate application password function uses this function to track the authentication status. If the user is authenticated, then we simply return the ID. Now let's do a search for this function. So this determine current user filter uses the WP validate application password function. Now let's do a search for this filter. As we can see the apply filters here. So this underscore WP get current user, it uses this filter to set the global current user. It uses the WP set current user function to set the global current user, which is then used throughout the WordPress to manage permissions and capabilities. Note that functions like underscore WP get current user are private functions and they are used internally to retrieve and set the current user. Note that private functions denoted by an underscore are not meant to be used in custom themes or plugin. They are meant to be used for internal use only. When a REST API is made with an application password, WordPress checks whether the request is an XML RPC request or a REST API endpoint. If authenticated, the current user is set and the API evaluates the user capabilities to perform actions like editing or deleting the posts. Here's how this works. So let us create a new request to create the default post type. We will use the same URL from the get endpoint, but change the post type to the default post type. In the authorization, we will use the same application password that we use for the get endpoint. Inside of the body, we will provide raw JSON data. We will provide a title and any demo value for the title. Let's change the request type to the post request type and let's try sending the request. If the user doesn't have necessary capabilities for the requested action, the API should return an error like, sorry, you are not allowed to create a post. So let's try sending the request. So you can see the API returns a message saying, sorry, you are not allowed to create posts as this user. This happens because the movie manager role is restricted to managing only specific post types, example movies or people, and doesn't have the access to default post types. Application passwords grant access only to the actions allowed for the user's role. For instance, a movie manager can manage CRUD operations for movie related posts, but cannot create or delete default posts as we saw in this example. An author can create and publish posts that they own but cannot modify posts belonging to others. An editor can access and manage all the content types, making them suitable for broader REST API actions. We can also use application password with custom REST route. For example, we have created custom REST endpoints for our movie library plugin. In these routes, we can use the permission callback function to track the current user capabilities. Functions like current user can be used to check if the authenticate user can perform actions such as editing or deleting post. Application password authenticate requests for both core and custom REST routes. The REST authentication errors action can be used for custom internal checks or third-party authentication integrations. For example, the block editor uses the cookie-based authentication with non-sys for security. Similarly, you can explore various authentication methods to fit your use case, as outlined in the WordPress documentation. That's all about REST API authentication using application passwords. After watching this, try implementing these concepts in your local environment to explore more. Thank you guys. See you in the next one. Bye bye. Jai WordPress.